Hello everybody and welcome to the next installment of the Magic Beans podcast Evergreen series. My name is Chewy and I am flying solo with a little bit of a controversial topic. Today we are going to talk about netdecking and, you know, the connotations of that word, a bit of the history of that word, and my opinion on what we should do with that term and the connotations associated with it. So I'm going to share a little bit of my opinion and some facts as well that inform that opinion, as well as some of my experiences. So feel free to join our Discord and enter in the discussion if you agree or disagree or on some or all of the points. Absolutely love to have you come in and have that chat with us in our Discord. You can also join in the Magic Beans events while you're there and enjoy all of the sweet prizes that we have thanks to our sponsor, which is the fine folk at Josh and Pat's MTG Bazaar. They are a Facebook auction group. They sell physical Magic cards with nightly auctions, premium auctions on the weekends, and you can get a sweet token. So one of the things that Josh and Pat's have done really well over the history is give away tokens as part of their auction wins. It's just like sweet cream on top. And the winner of the Magic Beans Invitational Series got to design a token. And on the back of the token, our Magic Beans logo shares a bit of real estate with the Josh and Pat's logo. So check them out. And when you do win an auction, please tell them that the Beans sent you. All right. Netdecking. So anybody who spent any time on the internet talking about Magic, be that, you know, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, forums, Discords, whatever it might be, you don't have to go too far to find people complaining about netdecking. And, you know, the comments often cite, you know, people lacking originality, and some people, and I hope these people are in the minority, but they accuse people that netdeck of lacking certain skills or abilities if they choose to play a deck that's had previous success. So I want to today, whatever time of the day you're listening to this, I would like to explore the history of netdecking, where that term's come from, and how it's evolved over the last 15 plus years, maybe up to 20 years. I'm not quite sure how long the term's been around, but well over 15 years. And as I said, I'm going to share some facts based on my experience. And I was around when netdecking kind of joined the vocabulary of Magic players in sort of the start of my Magic journey in 2003, 2004. So let's dive into the history. Let's understand, you know, where this term originated from, what its original meaning was, and then we'll have a look at, you know, how that's changed and how we feel about it today. So first off, facts. All major tournaments and the decks in them have been documented from day one, like from 1993. Whenever there was a Magic tournament or an article about Magic, and back then it was in Scry magazine, you know, pre-internet days, decks were published. People could find a publication and go, okay, I get it. Necropotence, Dark Ritual, or whatever the thing was at the time. And, you know, people were talking about Magic and sharing information and innovations. So, the standings have always been, you know, published and disseminated really, really quickly to Magic players by whatever means was available at the time, you know, be that through the aforementioned Scry magazine or through the internet. So there's never been an age in Magic's history where the winningest decks weren't public knowledge and shared. You know, it was in Wizards' best interest to share those decks because they're trying to sell the product, right? So from day one, decks have been shared. Every deck is a net deck. Full set content was always available as well. And for those old boomers like me, you may remember the massive encyclopedias of all of the Magic cards that would come out every couple of years with updates and full color scans and even discussions about some of the cards and, you know, why they were good. So, you know, there was always these publications. Then around 2005, the advent of online content creation and event coverage started. And we had a a bit of a boom. This was one of the booms of Magic that I was around for. I wasn't around in the early days, but yeah, around that 2005 mark, we had, a massive, spike in, people coming to the game and playing competitively. And we had state championships, we had regional championships, obviously nationals, Pro Tour qualifiers, and, a moment of silence to remember the glory that was the Pro Tour. And at every level, decks were published on various websites. We didn't have the accessibility of social media quite yet, but there was dedicated Magic websites and internet forums. One of those dedicated sites, and one of the ones that I got a lot of information and knowledge from in my early days, was Star City Games. It was really blowing up, had in-depth articles, deck techs, even like draft walkthroughs and stuff from the likes of Cedric Phillips, Jerry Thompson, names that are, familiar to Magic players even today. They were very good back in the day as well. And, just through these decks being published on these various media, a large percentage of the decks were adopted by the player base, and they took them to their local F&M. And this was the first iteration of Netdecking. This was the first time I'd heard the term. And, I was playing decks that I'd seen other people in my store play, or that I'd, recognized a synergy in a set. More on that later. And or a precon that I'd updated, right? So that's how I was playing Magic in my very early days. And then, I remember hearing the term NetDeck for the first time at a Saturday morning FNM, which was run at Card Heaven back in the day. And it was really, really interesting, especially to look back on now, because if you're bringing one of the decks to your local game store that you'd found on the internet, it might have been packing, 4 main deck shatters plus other artifact removal. And because Arcbound Ravager was everywhere, right? It was dominating standard at the time, and there was issues with doing that, because at my local game store there wasn't very much Affinity played collectively, and I don't know whether this was a decision that involved a discussion or just a collective silent agreement that Affinity was pretty toxic and no one wanted to play it. And if you brought Affinity, you were called a net decker, and it was a sledge because you just copied a deck without thinking about what you were playing against. So this was a term used to troll players who had spent, at that time, big money on a deck that lost to a meta that they weren't designed to perform in. And that's a point that we'll come back to as well. So hold on to that just for a second. Losing in a meta they were not designed to perform in. That is a really important point. It's a really important point in deck evaluation, but it's a really important point to what I'm talking about here. So circa 2005, mid-2000s, let's just say mid-2000s, the term net deck entered into our vocabulary as Magic players. A net deck was someone who didn't pay attention to their local scene and was punished for it. They were ridiculed for it. And honestly, that was pretty toxic by the players who were ridiculing, because the person just wanted to play a good deck, didn't know what to play, and, they were ridiculed by their peers. That was pretty bad. But yeah, a net decker was somebody who just copied a deck, didn't adjust it for any reason, just copied the 75 cards, sleeved it up, rocked up to a tournament, and, were usually punished for not adapting to their local scene. Of course, the internet's come a long way since the mid-2000s, and a massive uplift in Magic Online tournaments, with the advent of leagues in Magic Online, online PTQs, premier events, and in more recent years, obviously the big one is MTG Arena. And it's just seen an absolute explosion of cross Magic, right? And that means that there is so much information out there for your average Magic player. You don't need to pay for, Scry Magazine or a Star City subscription, or be a member of some obscure dedicated Magic forum. This has all been replaced with Reddit, regular WotC deck dumps, although they are a little curated. There's event coverage that includes deck lists. Winning decks are discussed by countless content creators or on a huge variety of platforms. And we've also got client add-ons like Untapped, right? Like there's literally never been more information out there. And when you add all that up, it's really important to consider that just via sheer volume, there's so much more Magic on all of these platforms that are played than there ever has been. So the information is out there so much faster, and because there's so many decks that are played across Arena, Magic Online, and even things like Spell Table, means that geography is no longer a boundary where niche metagames can cultivate, right? So it's not about my local scene or the North American or the Japanese or the Australian meta, European meta, right? It's, you log into Arena and you play a game on ladder. You don't know what country. There could be somebody next door, or it could be someone on the other side of the world that you're playing against. And that's pretty sweet. And look, local game store metas certainly do exist, and they can be really fun with, local rivalries and banter. But with the just sheer flow of information, players are starting to see each other rather than the decks as the opposition, which is often more correct. And an acknowledgement of skill is always a good thing as well. So yeah, it's, so decks arrive at their final form faster through all of this because there's just a sheer volume of Magic played, especially in comparison to other formats where, things were always still being discovered. In today's Magic, we're arriving at that point a lot faster. And, what that means is because things are happening so quickly and evolving so quickly, the most efficient thing to do if you want to play competitive is just do some research and find what you think is the quote unquote best deck. And, everything that I've mentioned and playing what you believe is the best deck does not always mean that the, format will arrive at that point and stay there. With all of those minds working together and the volume of games being played all over the world means that there's constant innovation, and there's just this turning wheel of that innovation, of that cycle and churn where, decks rise and fall in popularity and power. So copying one of those decks, Netdecking, doesn't always mean that you're going to win, because, your opponents can play good cards and they can change their decks. And yeah, it's a very similar thing to taking a deck in 2005 off the internet, rocking up with your LGS, because it was good 2 weeks ago in a tournament. It might not be good now. So because, the meta is different. It is a deck that is not designed to thrive in a meta that's not prepared for, as we spoke about before. So, as I mentioned earlier, the term netdecker or netdeck has taken on a really different meaning today to what it had, at its origin. It's no longer a sledge towards those who lose after copying a deck. Now it's a term used to describe those who win after copying a deck. So it's done like a full 180. And I find this really, really interesting. And this is not uncommon as far as, terms that are used to describe, things or people or what have you. Things can often take on different and opposite connotations. We won't get into that, but it's, we've all got examples we can think of. But what I found in my experience, and I'm absolutely 100% not trying to make a generalization here. This is my experience, and the commonality between Magic players who level these accusations, they often identify as players who use deck building as part of their self-expression, and they pride themselves on discovering, certain synergies and strategies all on their own. And for me personally, that type of discovery is something I love about Magic. It's something that I thoroughly enjoy, that discovery of a format, and it is something that pulls me towards Limited, because drafting those synergies and seeing them play out is great. Cube Draft, I'm a massive Cube Draft fan, and that's what Cube is all about. And Cube is effectively, Limited Commander and 7-Point Highlander, Australian 7-Point Highlander, my favourite format of all time, where the scope for those interactions and discoveries is pretty much infinite. Every time they print a new card, there might have been something lurking in the back of a commons box or in a binder somewhere that just became good. And I love that discovery. It's absolutely fantastic. And, you don't mind losing to something cool that you've never seen before in one of those formats. And kudos to the person for, making it work. And I absolutely love that about those, either limited or those enormous infinite card pool formats like Commander or Highlander, Cube Draft. So that's what pulls me towards that. But I don't think it's fair to put that expectation on Standard, because when we sign up to, play Standard, we've got a small card pool where the mechanics and synergies are literally designed into the set. So when Wizards release a set, they know that card A is good with card B. And we can discover that along the way, but, unless they've made a mistake and they realize that certain cards are too good, which when you think about the sheer volume of cards that come out, it's actually pretty rare. Probably not as rare as we would like. We would like it to be like mythic level, not rare level Wizards, but, we do appreciate the work that you put in. And yeah, so I don't think it's a realistic standpoint that people can choose to play a certain strategy and be labelled as somehow worse at the game or paying to win. I think that's not only toxic, but just straight up incorrect. So if somebody is playing, deck A or deck B or deck C, which is in our classic rock, paper, scissors, aggro, combo, control metagame, trying to keep this evergreen, I'm not going to give specific deck examples. If a player is playing one of those decks, they're the decks that are good. They're the decks. That's the format that was designed by the play design team, by Wizards, for us to play. Those decks have been discovered, solved by everything that we've spoken about, this hive mind and flow of information. And, if we choose to play Standard, that's what we're signing up for. It's a small card pool, finite number of available mechanics and synergies. So you're likely to face those decks really regularly. They will be the tier decks, and there'll be other decks that are functional and good against certain aspects of those other decks and what have you. But yeah, so going back to the people that, level those accusations, in my experience, and look, it can get frustrating when, particularly towards the end of the format, when, Standard can get a bit stale. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about players that are losing consistently to those tier decks and leveling blame at the pilots. It's not the fault of the pilots. You're probably losing because, you might be playing a weaker strategy. You might have just a poor matchup against it. Or, really importantly, you've failed to innovate and adapt to those decks. Just like a Netdecker did in the mid-2000s, where they've just taken a deck and they've brought it to their local store and they've gotten crushed. You might have found something that you think is good, built the deck, and you've gotten crushed. That's not the fault of the player who's crushed you. It could be that your deck's not up to scratch. It could be just needs work. You need to iterate and innovate within your deck. You might have something that's good, but it's not there yet. The first draft of your deck, you can't expect to be as good as something that's had, literally millions of brains behind it. So that's you don't be unfair on yourself. But, it's not another player's fault that the format was designed with, powerful planeswalkers that you can ramp into a la Ugin, or synergies with inherent card advantage, like adventures, or overpowered mechanic that is, just straight up better than the, probably cool and unique one that you've discovered. The players are playing cards that are available, that are designed to be played together. And if you're not playing a deck with a good counterplay to that, then that's actually on you. You need to adapt your deck and fit to that ever-changing meta. Or simply, it could be acceptance that your pet homebrew deck just might not be on the same power level as those highly tuned decks. And, you can still play it, you can still have fun, and you can still do your thing, and nobody's telling you that you shouldn't be doing that. I am in no way telling players that they should be playing one of these tier decks, but I'm saying don't get salty if you play against the tier decks. That's kind of the core of my message here. So in the back of my mind right now, I can hear people on the internet bashing their keyboards, talking and, screaming at me about how people at Netdeck are unoriginal and like the repetition is boring. But I'm talking about Standard here. I'm talking about the frame, the limitations that is the Standard meta, where the card pool is limited to the legal sets. So the notion that, people are somehow have to continue to innovate in that, no, it's a competitive format. They're going to play the decks that are good. And also, there's a sidebar. It wouldn't be a Magic Beans podcast without Chewy going on a tangent here. The notion that you're the only person to discover a synergy or a strategy out of the millions and millions of games that are played in a very short period of time, it's extremely unlikely. And, I could probably find your deck or a version of it on the internet anyway, so everything's a net deck, right? So, yeah. So, Commander exists for the broader interactions and diversity, and that's a really popular format for that reason. But that's just not a design consideration in Standard. Standard is a competitive format, and a lot of players will choose a deck based on win rate or matchups. And if a deck rises to the top of the pile, you'll see a deck that knocks that off, going to the top of the pile, and then so on and so forth. And you end up with this sort of cyclical thing, and different decks are good on different, weekends or different days. So, yeah. So because of that, because every deck is a net deck, I honestly think as a Magic community, as Magic players, we should just retire that term. I don't think we should use it anymore. I don't think it's a valid term in the Magic vernacular. All decks can be found on the internet, and the innovation, knowledge sharing, and the discussion the internet has fostered is far more valuable to the game's growth and longevity than the complaints of a few noisy people in the minority who are upset that their pet deck or homebrew isn't competitive, and they've somehow weirdly chosen that as their hill to die on, and that's where they're going to jump on their soapbox. And I don't think that's a good use of your energy. I think we should move past this and embrace the game for what it is, and honestly sharing your innovations, your ideas, and actually joining in the discussion rather than being stubbornly closed to others and their input and frustrated by your own results. That's far healthier for not only the game, but definitely yourself as well. So let's stop using that term. It's redundant now. Magic has evolved far beyond that, and we're all net deckers. You cannot avoid it. If you play Standard, your deck, exists somewhere by somebody else. And if you are the first person to discover it, you've discovered it minutes before somebody else, not days, weeks, or months, minutes. And if you're the only person that you see playing it, it's probably because there's a better option and people are playing decks with a higher win rate. So maybe a little bit of a bitter pill to swallow for some people, but that is 100% what I believe. So yeah, tell us what you think. Jump onto the Magic Beans Discord, which is linked in the description here. And yeah, you can find us there. We love a chat. Come and talk about Standard with us, talk about all of the formats that you want to do. You can also check us out on Twitch, on YouTube, on Facebook. Just search up Magic Beans Casts. You can check out great deals on your sweet cards that you want to build your decks with at Josh and Pat's MTG Bazaar. Just go to jpmtgbazaar.com.au. You can follow us on Twitter at Magic Beans Cast. If you want to follow me personally, I am at Chewy MTG on Twitter. And thanks so much for listening to my little chat here on Netdecking. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'd love to continue the conversation, as I said, over on our Discord. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next time on the Magic Beans podcast.